Martin Fowler once said, "Any fool can write code that a computer can understand. Good programmers write code that humans can understand." I think John Wood said it better. Always code as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent psychopath who knows where you live. How do we make sure the next maintainer doesn't try and hunt us down? Well, I think one of the easiest ways for us to write better code is by deleting the comments. It forces us to write clearer, more understandable code by utilizing the language's type system rather than letting the comments explain the code for us. Have you ever seen code like this before, where we're using comments to describe what these magic numbers actually mean? Rather than using comments, we can create an enum to actually describe what these numbers mean. Once we've introduced the enum, we don't need the comments anymore. Another frustrating example is having to read the comments on a method to understand the return type. This results in a lot of cognitive load and really slows down the development process because you have to navigate into the method, read the comments just to understand what this method is actually returning. This is a good example of primitive obsession. This is where we're using primitive types like ints, strings, bools to represent concepts that would be better represented as a class or a struct. Back to our example, rather than using a string to represent the return type of success or fail with an error message, we can create a result class that can represent this. This makes the code much easier to read and understand, especially if you're calling this method. You don't have to dig into the comments to understand why we're returning a nullable string. Now that we're returning a result, it's going to indicate to the caller this could be success or fail. We don't need these comments anymore. We can delete them. We're using a type to express what this method is returning, rather than commenting on it. Your goal shouldn't be writing the least amount of code. Your goal should be writing the most readable code while still remaining concise. Sometimes, more code is better than less code when it comes to readability. In this example, we have a multi-line conditional where we're checking if a user has access to a post. First, we check if the user owns the post, and if they don't, we check if the post is in early access and if the user is subscribed with a premium membership. This conditional isn't too complicated, but it's enough to warrant a comment, but we can actually write this a little bit differently. So what we can do to make this a little bit simpler and actually remove the need to write comments is extract each one of our conditions out to its own separate variable. Once we've separated everything out, our code now reads like the comment. We don't need it anymore. An example of code comments that I don't mind are comments that section off different parts of the code in a long method. Now, some people consider long methods to be a code smell, and each section of the code should be extracted into its own method. But I don't fall into that camp. Sometimes code is procedural, and we just have a list of steps that we need to execute. And I think it's easier to follow the flow of the code without having to jump around between different methods. I would only be extracting code into its own method if it's reusable. And most of the time, the code in a long method isn't reusable. It's specific to that method. But I'm going to let you guys be the judge of that. Let me know what you think down below. So to recap, how do we write better code so the future psychopath maintainer doesn't come after us? Number one is trying to write code without using comments. This will force us to write code that explains itself without having to rely on comments to explain it for you. Number two is utilizing the type system. The type system in our language is there to help us. We can use the types our language provides us, but we can also create our own types to represent concepts that are specific to our problem domain. And finally, sometimes more code is better than less code. While you can be the most clever programmer in the world writing the least amount of code possible, if no one on your team can understand it, then it's not good code. Sometimes more code is better, if it makes your code more understandable without having to add comments. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.